we've discussed data source being the data itself, native connectors in the query. Calculations have significant impact on performance as well. Being that calculations, the way that they are used, or the way that they are referring to fields, or what fields they are referring to, has significant impact on performance as well. So the general rule of calculation in this case is to use integers as frequently as possible, integers or booleans actually, and not to use strings as often. So for example, if you are creating a filter which says that the profit is lower than 0, in this case it is negative, positive, and very, very favorable. But what could be even better is that you could just say negative to migrate the calculation to transform it from some profits smaller than 0, then negative, to just say some profit smaller than 0, and then you create a boolean. So in this case you have not even a flag, so that's a color coding, but instead of having that color coding as a string field, as a text field, you could either create a boolean, or you could create a field, so also a color coding field, where you change negative to -1, positive to 1, and very favorable to 2. And a tip that I can give you there is, for example, no, that was not. Is superstore, I think here, is, for example, if I create a calculated field, profitable, so either we say some profits bigger than 0, that will create a boolean, customer, oh, that was not ideal, customer name, and then let's say profits onto columns, or no, let's take sales, gives a bit more context, and then profitable. True is green, red is false is red, of course. So you see, this creates a boolean. What we could also do is to say, because you can have, if you really want to have color coding, so I'll change this to smaller 0, because in this case we only have 2 colors. It makes sense to have more than 1 color. Then -1, and then we add a comment, and we say -1 is negative, so that people can understand this approach. So I'll just do it like this, then 1 there we have it. Okay, and then if we go into profitable, we could add a comment, and here as well say -1 is negative, 1 is positive. And then when they hover over that field, they will see that comment. And instead of having a field that's having to say here negative, which is less performant, of course, positive, we then have our context within that field. And even though we have it like here, you could still work around and edit the title for that and create some context there. So general rule is use booleans and integers as much as you can, and avoid using strings, not only in calculated fields but also in parameters. Instead of using a string as a parameter, try to use an integer, and then you can say display as. So the only thing that the data builder or the data architects in Tableau, data architect in Tableau, of course, has to think about is that the case statements or the if statements are in line with the parameter there. But that is a general rule. Then another and there's a lot of excitement, especially, well, a lot of excitement at BIS3 with 2020.3, where there's a new function, and I will come back to that in the end. But the general rule is to avoid referring to the same calculated field more than once. So on the left-hand side, you see that we're referring to, in this case, country, which can be a native field or can be a calculation. So if you have country codes and you have a field that is referring to country codes and then changing it to names, doesn't really make sense. But in this case, let's take that for as an option. We refer to that field 4 times. The general rule is not to do that, because you are referring to that field 4 times, and Tableau will have to go into your data and refer to and look for that function 4 times. Better is to create a case statement where you're looking at the country field, and the syntax is different, but in the end the result will be exactly the same. Is that you are using the country fields, and you only refer to it once, and you get the same end result. So you look into the country dimension or country calculated field. You say when it's Belgium, then Europe; when it's France, then Europe; when it's Germany, then Europe, etc. Instead of saying if country is Belgium, then Europe; then again if country is Belgium, then Europe; and then again else if country is France. Then you go into that same loop every time again, but for different countries, of course. So that is the referring to the same calculated fields once. So and below we have row level security calculation, and it really doesn't make sense, but just to give you guys the idea of how it shouldn't be and how it can be much better. So on the left hand side you see when your string starts with when your username starts with the username function. I will demo this in a bit for the people who are not familiar with row level security. Or if it ends with the username and username, which is the Tableau server username, then true else false. Instead, we could just use one native function by Tableau, which is the contains function, and it looks into the username dimension and checks whether or not your username is in that dimension. So I will show that. Row level security is, and I'm not going to go too much into detail there, but it's the concept of being able to show people only the data that they are allowed to see. So in this case, when we're continuing, and I think you're all familiar with the sample superstore data, we have a row level security sheet which contains usernames split by a pipeline and the region that they should actually see. So in this case, I'm Victor, so I could see East, and Matthias as well. Chris can only see West, etc., etc. If we join this data on region, then we have, and that's an inner join because in this case we have all the regions. So we have East, West, Central, South, and that's all of the regions that are there in the Superstore. We join on region, and then we will have a field. I'll remove this username coming from the row level security sheet and region. Region is the field in the Superstore, and you will see that we could actually filter on this field. And not only is this important, but what's important as well, and I'll show you this in a minute. So we can create a user set, and that is user filter. So we can create a user filter based on region, for example, and then we can do this manually, but no one likes to do this manually, right? So we have Damien who is allowed to see East, Geoffrey is allowed to see South, etc., etc. Not only is this a lot of manual work, but also there's a significant impact, because if you're publishing your work to Tableau server and people can only see their own work on the server, with these kind of filters, so we have user filters like we have here, and also with the native function is member of. It's a fact that the view that you will see is not related to the view that someone else will see. So the view that Agnese will see is not is very different to the view that I will see, and it will not be cached likewise. So that is with those two functions, so with the member of function and with the user filter. The thing is that the views are not cached as such. With the contains methodology, or with contains idea, it is the case. So what we can do is we can create this calculation. I think I've already created the calculation here, where we say our username in the data source. So username from the relative security sheet being Agnese Crisbigli split by pipeline with Damien, etc. So contains our username, and username being the Tableau server username. So if I add username here, you'll see with the function that my name is rendered, and you can change this here. So if I would change this to Matthias, you see that username then is Matthias. But if you're logged into Tableau server, this will always be your own username, obviously. So if I were to add this filter to this worksheet, and let's say we want to do this throughout the data source, you see that I can now only see the East data and data from there. And in this case, we have our data source, which is basically the general orders table, combined with relative security. So that is one data set, and yeah, that is much more performant, because this will effectively be able to cache into data. So the data is cached as such with the contains function. So that is also something to keep in mind. That was a bit of a sidewalk of this calculation topic, but nonetheless very important.